Hey, welcome to the Here Brotherhood podcast. I'm Mike Allen, and so excited to be talking with Ian Mai, who is anyone who's been following along the Here journey knows Ian because he's been a part of the Brotherhood from early on, and just an incredible voice, an incredible brother, friend to many, and has coached a lot of guys over the years. And man, I'm actually curious now because you've been on a bit of an evolution from even just a couple of years ago when we first met, and that's kind of where I'd like to dive in first. Just if you want to introduce yourself and kind of what you're doing, and then we'll get into the story of why and how you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So I am currently working and operating as an executive ADHD performance coach. So pretty much taking everything I've learned over the last 5 years for executive function, logic, reasoning, but also being able to turn on those brilliant moments of hyper focus that many ADHD friends will resonate with. But how do you turn it on in real time? How do you make it not happen by accident? But yeah, that's not what I started with when we first had our conversations with the Here Brotherhood and joining that community. So it's been a long journey since then,
Yeah,
but I'm excited just to be able to have that conversation and share with anybody who hasn't witnessed it, doesn't know who I am within your circle.
awesome. Yeah, and I do want to touch on just ADHD first in general because it feels like I'm just hearing a lot of buzz around ADHD lately, and like you've been one of those voices in my feed and and in the community. But I feel like outside of that, it's just having a moment right now. It feels like. Are you noticing that too?
100%. And I think there's good and bad with that, I think. And it's beautiful because there's more people who are getting to learn and understand more about how their brain works and being able to understand that focus and attention isn't a behavioral thing, it's a neurological thing. And so the more you understand the neurology and what's happening within the system of your brain, hey, I actually have more control over this than I realized. And so it's beautiful because, hey, the more people create awareness around that, the
Yeah.
better. But there's still a ton of stigma around it. There's still a ton of
Hmm.
stigma based on the pharmacology and, hey, get diagnosed with ADHD so you can immediately get on medications. And that is actually the part where I'm not saying I'm against that. It's just there becomes more taboo conversations that happen anytime you're
Hmm.
introducing medications to children, adults, anybody.
Hmm.
There's really strong consequences for misusing and abusing those types of medications that people are
Yeah.
getting on. But the more we start to understand, hey, our brains can all work and operate very differently. And so being able to say and give language to, and what I champion is you being confident in saying, here's how my brain works best in this working environment for these outcomes, for the goals that you say matter to this team, this business, or even for myself individually as a person. And I think that it's beautiful to see more people speaking up about it, but I also am the type of person who I don't want to get angry and aggressive and rally against the culture of business in general and the academic systems that were all broken and your parents ruined you, and quite frankly of like, hey, I've spent a lot of time learning how to heal and forgive every single one of those individuals, people, systems, if you want to call it that,
Hmm.
bad bosses from back in the day. My ability to actually move and operate in the world more effectively comes from this place of like forgiving all of that.
Hmm.
So all that may have been true, right? And I,
Hmm.
in my discussions with other men of being able to be labeled as sensitive for years of my life. So for all of my guy friends who have witnessed and seen me cry in public many times, unabashedly, unashamedly, they'd be like, yeah, Ian is a little bit sensitive, maybe. But as a kid, I just wore that constantly. And it shaped a
Hmm.
good amount of my identity of issues with masculinity and constantly thinking that like these high emotions were related to like not being a male, not being strong, not being confident, not being any number of obviously misguided perceptions. And so like that actually shaped a good amount of my upbringing to where now as an adult, like, hey, I actually had to heal some of those
Hmm.
maladapted behaviors, but also forgive the people who didn't know any better, didn't know any differently. And those relationships have actually been really healed and flourished now because I'm saying, hey, I actually don't regret anything that I've experienced because I love my life now. I love the people I get to serve. So yeah, obviously that was a very ADHD long-winded, not rehearsed answer.
No,
But it is
it's so
interesting.
good. It's so good, and I love that you spoke to that aspect of our own healing, which I think sometimes is underemphasized. Which is the acceptance and forgiveness aspect, particularly the forgiveness component. So thank you for speaking to that. That's beautiful. Just to like level set really quick, when you say ADHD, like how do you define that? What does it stand for? And maybe this is part of the answer too. I'm really curious about the kind of nature versus nurture component of
Mm.
ADHD. And I don't know if your research went deep into that, like kind of the causality, but it's something you hear all the time. Like, man, are we all becoming more ADHD because of our environment, because of the just constant distraction, stimulation that we have in our pockets all day, every day? So maybe a definition and a little bit of ideas around origins would be interesting.
Yeah. So one, science hasn't perfected in what is the causal relationship with ADHD, because there's some doctors and neuroscientists who say, hey, this is all very trauma based, where you have
Mm,
part of your brain, the amygdala limbic system of the brain, which is autonomic, part of the fight or flight responses, emotional parts of your brain that are all working overtime all the time. And so for somebody with ADHD, we can see from various brain scans that there's more blood flow of dopamine, norepinephrine around those emotional centers of the brain. So when I say, hey, I was growing up and I was very sensitive, like, yeah, I was in a state of hypervigilance oftentimes, and those emotions were just always under the surface. And when I would feel them a 12 out of 10. And
mm,
so just saying, hey, calm down, wasn't enough to acknowledge of like, hey, there's a real emotion happening here,
mm,
developing skills and strategies to navigate those. So the first part of this is the amount of dopamine, norepinephrine, and blood flow happening around those emotional centers of the
mm,
brain. And then the second part of this is that there is not enough dopamine, blood flow, and norepinephrine getting to the frontal lobe of the brain. And so
mm,
the frontal lobe of the brain, that's where more of our executive function is, our logic, our reasoning. That's the part of our brain that usually has a hand on the wheel when it comes to not saying things that we don't mean and emotional outbursts and blurting the thing. And then potentially, obviously, having more hyperactivity that's traditional ADHD. And this is even nuanced, more updated language. We used to have ADD and ADHD, and those are separate
mm,
things. They've essentially combined them to be the same. And what's interesting about even my own personal experience is that type 1 ADHD is more of classic ADHD, hyperactive, bouncing up and down. I have tools with me here and now that I use so that like there's my foot underneath this table is rocking back and forth over, massage ball, and my foot is bouncing, but from here to here, like I'm calm.
mm. Yeah.
But even being, that's like kind of the traditional way of people thinking about ADHD. But the other part of ADD, more of like the inattention of kind of being a bit of a space cadet, sort of in your own land, and they're a dreamer and just sort of very pensive. But when you're a child, they're like, hey, what do you pay
Yeah.
attention? Hey,
Pay
what,
attention. Yeah.
where's your head at right now? Like, what are you even thinking about? And so like there's those patterns. We've now bundled both of those into ADHD. And so when you talk about the taboo part of, hey, everyone's becoming a little more ADHD, well, the answer really is of like, one, we're becoming actually more emotionally dysregulated. We're
Mm,
more aware of our emotions. Sure, I completely agree with that. People have language, more language for the emotions, but our ability to navigate those emotions is actually decreasing. We don't have healthy language to be able to effectively communicate and navigate and regulate those emotions. And then the second part of this is, with the amount of dopamine stimulus that everybody has access to that's
mhm.
readily available, our sensitivity to dopamine goes down.
Right.
So the supply and demand chain is,
Yeah.
hey, dopamine is in really high supply, and so then the problem is our brain's just kind of like, all right, well, if there's only a little bit of it, I'm not sensitive to only a little bit of dopamine anymore. I need really
Mhm.
big bursts. And that the average person can experience that. So if you combine dopamine dysregulation and emotional dysregulation, it presents as ADHD, inattention,
Mm,
inability to focus, struggling to follow through with tasks. So the difference though is that me having the neurodevelopment of ADHD is that even after I have done everything to increase blood flow in my brain by being healthier with the things I eat, with the activity that I do, by even mobilizing external dopamine in what I eat, potentially with medication, that like I can still have these dysregulated patterns, even if I've built everything else with my brain to be the most effective as possible.
Mm.
Whereas some of those neurotypical persons who are presenting as ADHD, it might be that like, hey, if you actually did more of a digital reset, if you moved your body more, if you decreased inflammatory foods and you started to implement those things, how you present as ADHD actually might go away or at least decrease substantially. And so like there's actually a difficulty in the industry right now where ADHD is both being overdiagnosed and underdiagnosed all at the same time. And it's like, perfect, what do we do with that? I don't have an answer for you. And that's
Yeah,
honestly not something I feel called to fix.
sure.
What I feel called to solve is essentially how do I help anybody understand the ADHD experience so that we can actually learn how to turn on hyperfocus at will, and we can gain those lessons from learning more about the ADHD brain. I think that's really where I find my sweet spot is that component of like, hey, let's not even worry about whether you have ADHD or not and are
Hmm.
diagnosed or not. Let's talk about where are you dopamine dysregulated? Where is your attention lost with mundane, boring activities? And how can we increase the likelihood that you focus and follow through for things that are important to you, align with your goals that you have for yourself, and really are going to help you move forward in a more meaningful and purposeful life?
Mm, amazing. Okay. And just in case anyone's hearing ADHD and they're like, wait, what does that even stand for? The acronym?
Yeah, it's attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder.
Okay.
And I,
Which
quite
you've,
frankly, hate the it's a misnomer
mm,
because the attention deficit is part of the problem of that language. And part of what happens with the ADHD experience, whether it's inattentive or hyperactive, is that I don't struggle with having too little attention. It's quite the opposite. I have too much attention.
mm,
Every input signal that's coming in for me is being given equal emotional weight. So the person who just opened up the door in the back, the fact that my foot kind of hurts, there's this weird hole in my sock, my sleeves are kind of irritating me a little bit. Every single one of those is saying, I demand your full attention right now.
hmm.
And oftentimes I don't without training, without developing this as a skill, I have a hard time unhooking from those thoughts
Yeah.
as not being relevant or important.
So
And so
it's more about focus, really, it sounds like.
and so that's part of the difficulty too, is people don't completely understand what is focus. So they'll just say, hey, you need to focus. Okay, I know that I need to focus. Great, perfect, we agree on that. There's no argument happening there. What is focus?
Yeah.
Right, what is focus? And so the skills that can be developed is how quickly can you notice an intrusive thought. So I've already committed to one frame of mind, one task, one activity, and every time I have an intrusive thought, how quickly can I unhook from it? How
Mm,
quickly can I get back to redirecting to current focus? And how can I emotionally regulate so that an intrusive thought doesn't cause me to downward spiral and
hmm.
struggle and turn off even more? That increases more of the dysregulation and lack of focus and attention.
Wow. Right. Okay, cool. No, this is all super fascinating. In your personal journey with this is kind of where we started when we met with the Here Brotherhood, your personal journey of sexual addiction and helping and coach men through that. And then it seemed like it kind of evolved into discovering and learning more about um, the neuroscience and your personal ADHD, diagnosis. I don't know if you were officially diagnosed or just
Yeah.
figured this out, but then discovering the link between those things, I think is really fascinating. So if that's a story you'd be willing to kind of unpack for us, that would be, I think, really interesting and insightful for a lot of listeners.
Yeah. So the first thing I just want to come out and say, ADHD did not cause my sexual addiction and my struggles with pornography and cybersex. So anybody who hears I'm using ADHD as a scapegoat for that, just hear me on this. I have gone through a huge amount of ownership of the entirety of my behavior, how
Hmm.
that impacted my marriage and infidelity. And so just hear me on this. This is not saying ADHD caused this and therefore I'm absolved of all guilt.
Right.
So
Right.
I have
Yeah.
absolutely paid my time, and on top of that, am continuing to willing to work towards continuing to make my marriage intimate, safe, and connected, despite any number of old behaviors. So, just saying that as kind of a little context. But
Cool.
For me personally, so with the pornography struggles, this is something that's really common in pornography addiction, is that more likely than not, you were introduced to pornography before the age of 10 or 11 years old.
Mm,
It's pretty common for a lot of the men that I've coached and worked with, is a pretty common introduction that this became a tool for regulation at a very early stage.
yeah.
And so I talked about the fact that with ADHD, we have less dopamine in that frontal lobe. And so there's more in this emotional center of the brain. So the difficulty that people with ADHD have and why they're more prone to addiction, right? There's a 40% increase in likelihood of substance abuse disorders and various addictions where internet, phones, pornography, all of that is increased likelihood. It's because of the fact that when I get a bigger blast of dopamine, it finally breaks this dam, keeping the dopamine in that emotional center of the brain and moves it and rushes it to that frontal lobe of the brain. So after I have this big blast of dopamine, I finally feel normal. I finally feel like my full brain is functioning. My executive reasoning and logic is finally there. My cognitive functioning is there. My mental acuity. Like, I very much so celebrate and care about my mental faculties. I want to, and very much so, get and feel loved when people praise me for my mental ability and my intellectualism. And so if part of my brain's not working, my wife could tell you this, when I first wake up in the morning, I haven't moved my body, I haven't done anything to mobilize some of that dopamine, it's word salad. It's such a strong inability to use language and form words. And man, I don't know why, but the word salad's hitting really strong, and I couldn't tell you. I'm just like, I know why, because I haven't mobilized the blood flow that I need for my frontal lobe. I haven't mobilized the dopamine and norepinephrine. And so what's interesting though is that once I have that dopamine reach the frontal lobe of the brain, and I finally have that fully function operation happening, what typically then happens is either I'm going to use that logic to justify why and how I got that dopamine in the first place, or the opposite. I'm going to feel immense amounts of shame, immense amounts of guilt. And so the difficulty of that is, for anybody, this isn't just the ADHD experience, that's what we often feel when we get it stuck into any addictive pattern, is we're justifying how we feel safe. We're justifying how we feel connected with ourselves, with others. And then the other side of it is, if I haven't developed the emotional regulation skills to sit with shame, as soon as I get that that dopamine to the frontal lobe, ways that actually don't align with my values, but I have this immense response of shame, all I'm doing is just keeping that amygdala really heightened. The dopamine surrounding it is still really active. And this is where I find a lot of people that I'd worked with, where they'd find themselves in binges where it's like, hey, good for you. Maybe you watch some pornography once or twice, a month, and you just kind of relax with it. Clients that I've worked with, and myself included, would be like, no, I'm going to watch 12 to 15 times in a day, almost like a continuously seeking this thing and using this as an emotional escape. And so really what ends up happening for most people is being able to get to a point where you're like, wow, this just isn't serving me anymore. All of my beliefs that I held around what this was or wasn't doing, I can't hide behind that anymore. And for me, it led to, wasn't just enough to watch pornography of two strangers. It was, now I'm interacting and engaging with people online. And a lot of those belief systems reinforce that. And over time, what ended up happening is my wife had to find out. Obviously, those are secrets you just can't hide. They stink. That type of, honestly, for the way that I was going about it, evil, is you can't hide that. And when she found out, instead of completely shunning me and adding more to that shame and some beliefs in spiritual abuse that I experienced that I thought would happen, the opposite, where she was able to say, hey, this isn't it for us. And in
Wow.
fact, I I know you to be better than this.
Mm,
And I think that if you just put the power that you have available to you towards understanding this thing better, I think that you're going to get through this. But I just need to see you be able to put in the work. And so
wow.
I did. So all of those mental faculties that I had, all of the hyper focus that ADHD allows me, I directed it towards learning and understanding how this addiction came up, what was happening in my brain, but still not even really addressing or even thinking about the ADHD as participating in that. At the time, I was really not even understanding the mental health aspect, neurobiology from an ADHD lens. That probably cost me years of spinning my wheels that I would have been able to move a lot faster in the right direction had I done so.
Wow. Okay. I mean, there's a lot to dig into there, but first, it's an amazing response from your wife, and I just want to like honor that for a second, and just like wow. Um, that could probably be a whole big conversation to dig into, like how
Yeah.
did she have that sort of awareness and presence and all of that. But I think what I want to dig into a little bit more is the what were the aha moments of learning about the what it means to have ADHD or your neurological functioning, and what were those things that helped you realize, like, or at least connect the dots of like, oh, maybe that's why, or and now what do I do about it, right? How do I
Mm-hmm.
stay in this place of recovery and not in that continued cycle of going back to like up the dopamine, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting about what inevitably that turned into is that all of the impulse control, addiction management, that just started to turn into everything impulse control related. So now all of a sudden I'm going from, okay, now they figured this out for my pornography use. What else? And I just started obsessing about what are the behaviors. And it was all based on the behaviors. It was all the outside looking in. What else can I go apply this to? And so I started applying it to my impulsive spending, which was a problem for me. That was something I used. I would use stimulation for, was spending way more money than what we had. I found ourselves in $60,000 worth of debt. Used a home equity line of credit to then put towards a bunch of other things that were not paying me money. So not useful debt. Um, but so then being able to apply it to that. And so really learning how to hyper obsess, how to I rebuild these new behaviors around this other thing. And obviously then hyper obsess about how to even rebuild my marriage. And essentially I just kept categorizing all of these different aspects of impulse control and emotional regulation. And it really took somebody who was coaching me to be able to say, Ian, you're just an ADHD coach. You've just been looking at it from the behavior first and loosely looking at the neurobiology. And if you spent more time at this, I bet the ADHD language would actually clarify a lot of why you do work so well.
Hmm.
And so what was interesting is that most of my clients were coming back to me saying, "Oh yeah, I really struggle with ADHD," and I like was just like, moving on. Like, sure, maybe we all do, which is a very common thing to be able to say. But being able to even look at myself, of I had actually gotten diagnosed in my mid-20s. When I got diagnosed in my mid-20s, I actually thought I was masking to pretend that I had ADHD so I could get ADHD medication. So I was using it to abuse it, when in reality I had it. Probably could have used the medication in the first place. But so it was such a weird cycle, obviously. But it wasn't until many years later that understanding this is part of my ADHD experience. And now the beauty of it is I can create more awareness around when I'm more likely to be emotionally dysregulated. How does that happen? What does that look like? What are some cycles that I often see myself going through that I can now prepare even more for? So it actually helped even increase my resolve around all of the patterns that I had built, but now gave me more language to be able to express why is it that I can find myself so emotionally dysregulated or feeling feelings 100 out of 10 when anyone else might say like, hey brother, that's a 10 out of 100 and you've flipped it. Why is that the case? And so it actually helped give me more language and more tools and more insights that categorized more of this like human experience that I was going through.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So when you're working with people, what are the things that you kind of watch for? Let's say some people may be like, "Oh yeah, I already know I have ADHD." Maybe some don't know or don't have that awareness. Are there things that you kind of observe or see with people that you work with where you're like, "Oh, that those are symptoms of this neurological condition"?
So with my coaching, I try not to focus on helping somebody create a diagnosis, because for some of them, they're like, "Hey, I'm pretty sure I have it. I don't need to get a diagnosis because I'm not trying to look for pharmaceutical interventions." And so for those people, it's like we can just agree you have it or act and behave as if you have it. The beauty of going through it in that lens is that we can just focus on the neurology of directing attention and focus, and it applies for ADHD. It's more so the fact that the speed at which the dysregulation happens is heightened with ADHD. And so any average neurotypical person can experience this type of dysregulation. And that's the part where people with ADHD in the ecosystem right now don't like when people say, well, everybody has a little ADHD. Yes, that you can receive that as being offensive, or you could say, and yes, you should learn from somebody who's crazy ADHD how to navigate it. Right? Like,
Mhm.
let me
Yeah.
be the one to help you go through this process of how do I help you increase your attention and focus for somebody who struggles with it more than the average person. That's that's more important, right? Like if I
Yeah.
wanted to go learn how to swim, I wouldn't actually go to Michael Phelps to learn how to swim because he just kind of does a lot of things without thinking about it. It's subconscious. No, actually, I want to go to the person who learned how to swim at 35 years old because he had to come up with a system starting at 35, working until, with his current knowledge as an adult and with those patterns, and like had to really build a system around that. And so that's the part for me of I treat it more as lessons from the ADHD brain rather than lessons for the ADHD brain. And
Yeah.
that sounds a little
Yeah.
too ubiquitous, but it really powerful in how it helps even the neurotypical person turn on hyper focus and focus for the things that matter to them.
Yeah, no, I actually love that orientation, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, that you're just reinforcing that you're not interested in diagnosing, but just in what do we do with these uh, normal responses to stimuli, which for some may feel that neurologically, biologically, all the different factors may feel exaggerated, right? It may feel more intense, which is kind of how I heard you describe it. So I'd be interested in hearing what are some of the go-to tools, techniques that you introduce or help people understand, and how and when to apply those, just so they're able to navigate. And is there potentially as a byproduct, the benefit of reducing unwanted tendencies, behaviors, addictive tendencies, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I love this question because that is the answer that I really want to spend the rest of my life continuing to to understand. Right, as of right now. So making room for the fact that I'm sure there are better ways. I'm sure that I haven't gotten this all right. But I think what's interesting about the ADHD experience is that typically they struggle with a lack of interoception. And so, as an example, little kid throws a rock through a window, and it's only afterwards that you're like, "What the heck were you thinking?" And they're like, "I wasn't thinking anything. Like I was just looking for some stimulation, and this felt right in my body. Like I don't have an explanation
We
for it."
it's that impulse control thing, right? I had an impulse, I just acted before I thought about the consequences.
Yeah, but that interoception crosses over a lot of things. So sometimes it's with like thinking and awareness of thoughts, right? This metacognition, part of the skills of what I do is even changing how you think about thinking. And so there's a skill related to how do I separate myself or like my identity or my consciousness from thoughts. And that's a skill. And the difficulty is that most people don't think about that as being a skill. They just go through life and be like, yeah, I have these thoughts, and some of them I judge and shame myself for, and some of which I don't. With the ADHD experience, because I might have 1,000 thoughts coming through my mind all at once, a lot of them come with a lot of emotional energy, visceral responses that I have. And so the skill initially is how quickly can I develop language for my human experience? And so what I walk my clients through initially is how do I get this thing called hemispherical lateralization to happen? And I've practiced saying that 1,000 times over so I can get it right just for this conversation. And I did it. High five. Crushed it. So hemispherical lateralization is essentially where part of your brain is part hemisphere of your brain is more responsible for the ideation, big picture thinking, dreaming, but those creative parts of your brain can also be creatively thinking about all the ways you're going to die and creatively rerunning that conversation you had with your manager that you put your foot in your mouth and you said that dumb thing and now you're going to get fired. Spiral, 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 right? And so the difficulty that most people have is they think their thoughts are participating in their executive logic. It's a different hemisphere of your brain. And so what I get them to do is start using I am noticing statements. Oh, hey, I'm noticing the I'm too much for people thought. Oh, I'm noticing the I'm struggling to focus issue. Oh, I'm noticing the I'm too much for people. Oh, I'm noticing the I'm lazy story. Oh, I'm noticing some catastrophizing. And so what happens is that the left hemisphere of your brain is more part of the executive logic. It's also participating in motor muscle movement. which is why journaling is so powerful. Hey, if you just journal what your thoughts are, it creates more neural connections between right hemisphere and left hemisphere. But hearing yourself say the thing out loud, the motor muscle movements, hearing yourself say it, and the act of forming the words uses this left hemisphere. So part of the skill initially is, hey, let's just go collect 50 I am noticing statements over the course of the next week. And I don't care what they are. And it can be about thoughts, stories, beliefs. If you're struggling to know what you're thinking, then go to more of the visceral experience. Oh, I'm noticing some tension in my eyebrows because I'm kind of intense right now. Oh, I'm noticing some pulsing in my temples. Oh, I'm noticing my eyes are darting back and forth. Or I'm noticing some tension behind my jaw, which might be cortisol and adrenaline. And so the more I can even develop that language, and the final one being behaviors. Oh, hey, I'm noticing that I'm going back to the pantry even though I just ate. I'm noticing that I turned off LinkedIn on my computer, but then immediately picked up my phone and pulled up LinkedIn. Personal example. But just being able to give language for the I am noticing for internal visceral and emotions, internal thoughts and beliefs, and then just behaviors, the output. And the more I can just practice the I am noticing, as soon as I notice and hear myself notice and do that step, now I can intervene in some way. That's the biggest thing that most people with ADHD have, is they feel like they're in that autonomic response. Like, hey, why did you throw the rock? I don't know. I just did it. They don't necessarily have the skills to notice when they're seeking stimulation, noticing when they're in that downward doom and gloom catastrophization spiral. And so the sooner we can help them create that break point, the sooner we can now what? Okay, now what's required of my nervous system? What's necessary for me in this moment in real time? So that next step then is the emotional regulation piece. Okay, how can I in real time dissipate adrenaline and cortisol if that's what's happening? Slow my heart rate down and my blood pressure to drop that. How can I maybe potentially get some stimulation that's more sustainable and not a big spike and a big drop? All of those questions I can start to answer now that my executive logic is participating and has a little bit of a hand on the wheel. For most people, the initial stopgap is, how do you breathe so that you're actively signaling to your brain to calm and regulate your autonomic nervous system? And this is the part where people will often fight me on this, because they're like, hey, you're about to talk about breath work, aren't you? Yes, I am. And very lovingly, you've breathed every day your entire life, but you still suck at it. And I just want you to hear it. It's okay. I do too.
Yeah.
The only reason why I've gotten better at it is because I do this with clients. So I'm forced to have to practice this in real time with them, which is great. So one thing that's interesting about what most people say, hey, calm down, take a breath. Okay. So the problem with even language like that is, first, the person who said it didn't say this in a loving way that's actually helping me feel calm. So you're aggressively telling me to calm down. That's not helping. Amygdala's in that fight or flight response. The other part of this is you don't calm down first and then take a breath. So the order is wrong. And then finally, taking a breath does not calm your nervous system. So if your heart rate is through the roof, you can inhale and hold your breath for a really long time and not have your heart rate slow down and not feel any calming sensation in your nervous system. And so even just the misnomer of calm down and take a breath, like it's problematic, and that is entirely wrong. And so what the beautiful part of this is, how do we practice and strategize around increasing our ability to control the exhale? And it's in the exhale and the duration of time before we inhale again that actually signals to that parasympathetic nervous system, now, hey, we're safe, right? That sympathetic response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Hey, parasympathetic, I can inject some of that parasympathetic nervous system signal with and that long pause and that long exhale. It's actually the duration of the exhale and the pause before inhaling again that signals to the nervous system, hey, we're good. In fact, I don't need a crazy amount of oxygen right now because I'm not in a fight. I'm not fighting the bear right now. And so that process in real time, how do I get somebody to decide, hey, I need to take some breaths, and it's from a loving place and I'm not being like, calm down, take a breath. But the other part of this though too is that that's a skill that I can develop. I can intentionally, in a controlled environment, increase cortisol, increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, and then practice and rehearse in real time when that's elevated, slowing my breathing down, calming my nervous system, and practicing the habit of slowing down that exhale and decreasing my heart rate. I do this once or twice a week. I'll do 20 minutes of high intensity interval training, 4 minutes on and a 2-minute rest. And I'm actively watching my heart rate as I'm controlling my diaphragm and doing this really long exhale. My body is screaming at me to inhale again, but I'm practicing this rehearsal. I'm safe, deeply left. And slowing down the time before inhaling again. And inside of 2 minutes, I can get my heart rate from 175 down to below 120. Practicing that. I'm challenging that system that wants to be in the fight, wants to be in the flight, wants to fawn, wants to freeze, whatever my typical pattern for creating safety is in my nervous system. But I can do that with my breath. What's interesting about this, though, is that this is still only one part of the process. When you have a heightened amygdala, and it's chronically heightened with the ADHD experience, the amygdala and the hippocampus often work together. The amygdala is the part of the brain that's just giving you the alarm bells. It's just saying, hey, we've been alerted that there's something worth getting into a fight, flight, freeze response. We're not sure what it is. And so it tells the hippocampus, give us context, right? So if the amygdala is the fire alarm, the hippocampus is the security guard that shines the flashlight on the fence line. It's the security cameras. And so part of why I even say, hey, tap on your chin and say, I am noticing, is that you have the hippocampus assesses these biofeedback loops for where is the danger coming from, so I can get context for what's activated my amygdala. And so part of this, my process of what I go through of finding where do you feel in your nervous system where you feel the most discomfort in your diaphragm. For me, it's like in my neck. Oftentimes you'll see me like rubbing my chest as I'm slowing my breathing down. But you can look at pretty common places where the hippocampus looks. And furrowed brow, I said earlier, right? Temple, see, smell, taste. You have lymph nodes right here in your collarbone. You have lymph nodes here in your armpit. And then even like the tapping of the top of the head, that somatic experience of like, hey, good job, buddy. Well done, bud. Good boy. Yeah. And as we breathe, as we exhale, I can give my brain context for I'm actually safe, right? And there's a lot of people, a new strategy is called brain spotting, where you've been so conditioned that there's a part of your eye line that is associated with unresolved trauma. A whole bunch of things that essentially all it's trying to do is tell the hippocampus to signal to the amygdala, we're safe. And we need to give it that context. And so sometimes if I'm in a meeting, I can't in real time be like, give me 15 minutes. I'm going to go practice some breath work and do a bunch of weird tapping and woo-saw stuff. I might have to just very quietly and just slightly tap on this one. The beauty of that, though, is because I've practiced it when my amygdala is really active, the cortisol is really elevated, the adrenaline was high. Now I can get that same calming sensation in 1 or 2 breaths. It's not a huge intervention that's required of me to then in real time make that happen.
That's with the practice, with the conditioning, right? And then you start to just have that associative, like I can do the little bit to get the same effect that used to require more of that effort, right?
And I think that's the part where most people are like, well, I don't want to feel that thing, so why would I rehearse feeling that thing? You're right. It's uncomfortable. Yeah. And on top of that, is currently your current behaviors and patterns are not serving you anymore. So is this worth you getting rid of those patterns? And some of them, they're like, no, it's not that big of a deal. It's not wounding and hurting my life all that much. I don't care. It's not worth me trying to make an intervention of this kind. Great. So be it. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm not going to waste my energy doing that. But for me, what's beautiful about this process, every time I find a new scenario in which I am extremely dysregulated emotionally with dopamine, behaviors, any of those things, I collect that data. I obsess about collecting that data. So then, hey, next time I have my practice of breath work, emotional regulation, I'm going to visualize that scenario in which I'm the most triggered, the most dysregulated, because I want to respond differently next time. I'll give you a really good example of this. I already told you, I very much so pride myself in my mental faculties. Big emotional trigger for me is if you belittle my intelligence. Huge emotional trigger. So for my wife and I, her having no bedside manner and somewhat being sarcastic when she's trying to give me feedback because she didn't know how else to do it, I'd be extremely triggered because I'm like, why are you talking down to me? I'm not a child, and these big, very angry outbursts. obviously I didn't love the way that I was showing up there, because I would say things I didn't mean, say things that I'd have to walk back from, when in reality, like there was actually some real hurt here that was worthy of a conversation. But I don't even get to have that conversation because I'm still apologizing for putting my foot in my mouth or putting my foot through the wall, depending on how angry I got. Right. And I think for anybody listening who's like, I don't have ADHD, I just have an anger problem. It's like, well, but I mean, even those moments of like, oh, wait, now I can visualize and practice moments in which I might feel triggered about somebody belittling my intelligence. And now I can rehearse and practice how I respond, how my body responds, so that next time, what else? Tell me more. Tell me more about how I'm an idiot, how I got this wrong. It becomes what everyone talks about of looking and appearing very confident, looking and appearing very regulated and stoic. I still feel these emotions to the extreme. However, it just doesn't cause me into a downward spiral as quickly, as often, or for that matter, with the same level of intensity. So I can continue to love my family well, be loved by them because they're confident in the fact that dad's going to respond in a way that I can predict. It's not scary. It's not intimidating.
Reactive. Yeah.
Yeah. And all of those things. It's like it's important to me. And so I'm going to practice this. It's important to me. So I'm going to rehearse this for the times in which it matters the most.
I love that. And in the practice that you gave at the beginning, could this also apply in relationship, like in a moment that you just, like what you just described? Let's say I just felt a little insulted of my intelligence and I'm feeling the big reaction. And you talked about saying, hey, I'm noticing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that a tool that could be used in relationship of like, wow, I'm noticing I'm having kind of a big reaction to this, but I can now get to the source, which is me, not because of what you did, but because of what's coming up in me. And how does that play out for you?
Yeah. So in relationship, it very much so is, hey, I'm just noticing real quick, like you made a comment about how I load the dishwasher and how I was born in a barn. And I know that you didn't mean for me to take offense to that or feel any bitterness, but like I'm actually kind of noticing like I'm feeling a little hurt and I'd like to talk about it. Right? Like that sounds really silly. Like that's a silly example. I can tell any newly married person your first argument is going to be about how either one of you loads or doesn't load the dishwasher. But so even being able to say, hey, the story I'm telling myself and hearing yourself say that, hey, I'm noticing that I'm feeling a little bitter right now. Like I'm actually feeling kind of hurt. And the story I'm telling myself is, hey, you don't respect me. I don't actually think that you believe that. I don't actually think that you intended for me to feel that way. But the fact that I can have that type of regulation and have that conversation, now this conversation is creating more intimacy and more connection and more safety in our relationship and trust, that now is increasing my ability to sit even more deeply with her emotions.
Yeah.
We used to have these like really big arguments because it would be me saying like, hey, I didn't like that.
Yeah.
And the story I'm telling myself is, well, you don't respect me. And she's like, I can't believe that you would think that about me. And she's getting defensive too, right? Because I'm pointing this finger at her, like, you said this, you did this, you think this about me, and therefore you're a terrible person. But my ability to, hey, notice, hey, I'm actually kind of noticing that like this is starting to, I'm creating some resentment, and I don't want to give energy to that. Like, can we have a conversation about this?
Yeah.
It can apply to a lot of things, and right, and it applies to boundaries that we set with people. It applies to boundaries we set at work. Hey, real quick, like that sarcastic comment that you made in that important meeting with the entirety of the executive board. Hey, like I don't think that you meant for to come off this way, but hey, the story I'm telling myself is like, you don't respect the work that I do, and I'm kind of noticing a pattern. Like in the future, if you could either one, voice your complaints with me directly and privately, so we can talk about it, or two, what can I do to ensure that you don't use that type of language in the future to belittle my ability or intelligence and so on, like, right, whatever that looks like in a professional environment. But as soon as you get emotionally dysregulated, your ability to think with that level of cognition and that level of confidence goes out the window.
Yeah.
And that's the part where people are like, I have so much potential, but I don't trust people in power, and I need to go work for myself because I can't handle criticism and bad managers this and bad managers that. It's like, well, okay, maybe there's a symptom of ADHD there, but more likely than not, it's you've got some emotional dysregulation that you haven't learned how to develop and navigate.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that speaks to the other side of, in a moment of conflict, sometimes it might be hard to just go right into, hey, I'm noticing, when you're just feeling the raw emotional reaction, right? And so that
Yeah.
that would require implementing the skills of just self-soothing and regulating, whether it be through breath or some movement, or maybe just creating some space from the stimuli, whatever it was, spouse
Yeah.
or what, as often as possible, right? It's not always possible, like you said. You can't necessarily walk out of a meeting in mid meeting because something triggered you, right? But just
Right.
learning those little skills, and then being able to come to that, hey, I'm noticing. And then I feel like even the step beyond, or maybe it's integrated, I don't know if there's an order to this necessarily, but what you described of just being able to say, um, tell me more, because
Yeah.
you're no longer in a defensive stance.
Yeah.
You're curious and you're open, but you're good with to be able to hold space for your partner or whoever it is to be able to share more, and that gives them a tremendous amount of safety as well, which I think is really powerful. So any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, that language, tell me more, one, is powerful, but two, help me understand. Because like help me
Yeah.
understand where my story is wrong, because this is the story I'm telling myself. Help me understand where I'm wrong. And so even one, that invitation is a powerful one. And for my wife, who would get defensive, being like, I can't believe you think that. Hey, I can see that you're getting a little defensive. I'm not telling you that you're a bad person. I'm just trying to share this so we can understand each other better. Help me understand where this is coming from. Oh, hey, you're having a hard time bringing up the dishwasher thing because you only know how to use it in sarcasm and so on, and you're laying it on so thick now that you're actually cutting into me pretty deeply. I love a good joke. I love even being the brunt of a good joke. However, in this moment, like, hey, this is happening. But so this idea of, one, you can develop so much confidence in, there's actually something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So this feeling of, if I perceive some amount of rejection, so whether it's real or perceived rejection, my body feels a visceral response.
Hmm.
And so I've had to practice visualizing and thinking about the nature of the story I'm telling myself around what rejection means, and having rehearsed, how do I calm down that rejection in real time? And so some of this, the difficulty for, I think, with the anger part of it, is I talked about dopamine, norepinephrine, and blood flow to the frontal lobe. Anger, oftentimes with adrenaline, mobilizes a lot of that to the frontal lobe.
Hmm.
And so people will struggle to be told to calm down because they're like, no, I'm finally thinking clearly now because I have the dopamine, norepinephrine, blood flow that I need.
Hmm.
And so they're actually like
Interesting.
really holding on, again, justifying how I got the dopamine, norepinephrine, blood flow. I know I say that a lot, but it's, one, rehearsed, but two, I try to make it that. But so they're justifying how they got it in the first place. And so part of this is, hey, I'm actually not willing to sit with the emotion that's underlying the anger, because the real emotion is feeling hurt, feeling
Hmm.
sad. Actually, I'm feeling a lot of fear of isolation and rejection. And so now the only emotion that makes those other emotions feel safe or feel validated is anger. Oh, you'll take my
Hmm.
anger seriously. Okay, you didn't
Hmm.
take it seriously when I said that I was feeling sad. You'll take my anger seriously. Now I'm feeling bitter. Now I'm feeling like aggressive and angry. The interesting thing about this, though, is that once we actually kind of learn and understand, okay, there's this emotional dysregulation piece and then the dopamine piece, is that sometimes I might have to, in these like break the glass in case of emergencies moments, I actually might have to mobilize some intensity to mobilize that blood flow and norepinephrine to the frontal lobe.
Hmm.
And so for some of my clients where it's like, hey, your amygdala is really active right now, rather than us immediately going, calm down, take some breaths.
Hmm.
Instead, we're just being like, no, move through it. By all
Yeah.
means. No. Yeah, get intense.
Yeah.
We'll do the opposite of that breathing. We'll
Hmm.
actually exasperate that intensity just for 30 to 60 seconds even. And
Hmm.
some of that is actually, there's some love that you can share with that, of like, hey, it's okay that you're angry. You're allowed to be
Yeah.
angry. In fact, like you're feeling pretty hurt right now. And so it allows you just to move in through intensity. So it's not that we're mobilizing anger, and I'm not
Right.
validating the anger and the angry outbursts and rage. It's
Yeah.
more so I'm using intensity for the sake of stimulating the blood flow that my frontal lobe needs, just long enough so that when I then
Yeah.
big exhale, hey, you're safe.
Yeah.
Hey, you don't need to prove anything to anybody. And so sometimes it's like I give the amygdala its day. right? I
Hmm.
give its fight or flight response just a little
Yeah.
bit of like, hey, you're allowed to be upset.
Yeah.
We can't stay there though, because
No.
we do know that it's important that we manage and regulate this. So those are more of like the break the glass in case of emergency moments. Like that's for me, and what it was like for me at 3 o'clock in the morning when I would have the biggest food binges, the biggest porn binges, sometimes the biggest impulsive spending binges, where all of a sudden
Mm.
I'm searching Facebook Marketplace for that like deal, but I'm still spending whatever it is.
Hmm.
Those moments when, as soon as I notice, hey, I'm really dysregulated right now emotionally, hey, thanks brain for reminding me that I could use some stimulation. Or, hey, I'm noticing some of these behaviors that I've already said like don't align with my values. Now what? Because I might not be ready to just immediately do some breathing and so on.
Hmm.
Like I might have to move through this.
Mm.
But the beauty of that is, now that I understand that I've mobilized this blood flow, now I can take more effective action to, from a loving place, use my frontal lobe and executive reasoning not to justify, not to shame, from a loving place, slow the breathing down, calm the nervous system. All of those things combined just create this really big ecosystem of these practices and habits, builds
Hmm.
us to be prepared for those big Super Bowl moments when it matters the most.
Mm.
When you're about to go on stage, how do I dissipate adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine in real time so I'm not locked up, so my voice isn't shaking when I'm about to go present to somebody, my
Mm.
hands aren't shaky? How do I dissipate those neurochemicals? How do I rehearse this and practice that? Now all of a sudden it's like I feel unshakable. I feel like I can move through the entirety of the human experience. And the difficulty for most people is, for a lot of people, they do this on accident and they don't know how to do this on purpose. And they
Mm.
create an identity around the fact that they don't know how to do it on.
Wow. Yeah. So much there too to unpack. I want to come back to one thing that you emphasized, which I loved, which was in that relationship dynamic of just wanting or seeking to understand. And I think it comes from the Gottman Institute research, this insight around the purpose of conflict in marriage. It is not to reach a compromise, it's actually to understand each other. Like that is ultimately the objective. And that just landed so powerfully for me when I first heard it, because I was just reflecting on, yeah, what have been some of my recent conflicts or arguments. And more often than not, the thing that's going on in my head is like, I just want to feel understood. That's at the core. And I was like, wow, they just nailed it on the head. And you just reinforced that in the comment you shared earlier. So I just had to bring that back up because it's such a powerful thing. The other thing I wanted to touch on is this perception of identity, and how, what identities do we sort of label ourselves with or take on based on past patterns, past behaviors, whatever it may be. Any work that you help people do to get clarity on identity and actually to let go of some of those labels or shame identities or just false identities. Um, just any thoughts on that? And that could kind of bring us home here, actually.
Yeah. So some of it is being able to believe the best about them before they do. And there is some amount of, hey, I can't help you go back and have a healthy conversation with your father. Can't do that. But I can bring some loving dad energy into this conversation and being able to say, hey, I see you. I'm proud of you. Hey, this little action that you've taken, it's worth celebrating. Let's celebrate that. Help me reinforce behavior that aligns with this new version of you that you're trying to create. Help me help you reinforce the thing you want to see more of. And so part of this is being able to actually help them understand that there is no belief, there's no identity, there's no, and honestly, in all seriousness, the way that I look at identity and beliefs, they're just thoughts that we've repeated 1,000, a million times over about who we are or about the nature of the world.
Yeah.
And somehow or another, those thought patterns feel safe in our nervous system. And the difficulty of this is, as soon as our nervous system perceives something not to be safe, it retaliates. It releases all of those hormones. And so as soon as I start challenging an identity that I've held for a long time, a belief system that I've held for a long time, it's immediately going to start releasing the cortisol, the adrenaline,
Hmm.
all of those things to say, nope, seek safety immediately, quick. And so part of this is I have to develop real strategies for reinforcing every time I act in a way that aligns with this new belief, this new pattern, this
Hmm.
new behavior, and doing it from this place of love. And for most people, they don't know how to do that because they think of any type of behavioral correction as punishment, as
Hmm.
discipline, as punitive.
Yeah.
And so
Or
how do I
something,
help
something's
them?
wrong. Something's wrong with me, right? Yeah. The
Yeah.
shame message there. Yeah.
And the isolation for people with ADHD, there's
Mm,
additional isolation because they're like, there's something wrong with me because other people don't struggle with this the way that I do.
mm,
There's something wrong with me story,
hmm.
right? And all of that is, hey, you might have had some maladaptive behaviors, but from this loving place, we can thank our brains for doing the best that it could with the tools it had. But we have better tools now.
Hmm.
So now that I have better tools, I can thank my brain for its attempt. Didn't always do the right things, maladapted in some of the patterns. But the more frequently I can actually have intrusive thought, gratitude, and thanks for it trying to keep me safe, trying to remind me of all XYZ important tasks. Like, how many emails have I been avoiding since this conversation started? And part of my brain saying, "We've got work to do." Hey, thanks, brain, for trying to keep me productive. Redirect. And that's meditation to a T, right?
Hmm.
Is how many
Yeah.
times can you have intrusive thought, unhook from it emotionally, viscerally, and redirect back to your breath
Hmm.
or something that you're trying to drive your attention to? And that's the part for people with ADHD. They're like, well, that's really boring. And because it's boring, it's not stimulating my frontal lobe.
Hmm.
So I don't know how to reinforce that behavior.
Or
But
I'm bad at it, right? I'm just bad at this meditation thing, so I'm not gonna do it anymore, right?
exactly. So
Yeah.
and that is the part of, hey, how do I learn how to celebrate just the smallest action that leads to more of that action?
Mm,
And what's interesting is that with any skill, the better you get at it, the more novelty you find in smaller and smaller nuances
mm,
of the pattern and of the skill. And so even with my
interesting.
exhales, I try to make every single one novel and interesting. And this time I'm going to do it from this like low, growly place. And the next one I'm going to do it from my lips and and the one that I share with my daughter, this is her favorite one, is where I start out sounding like mommy and I end sounding like daddy. And I go, oh. She loves it. And but so part of it is like, how can I make this novel? How can I make this more
Mm,
interesting? How can I
mm.
obsess about this in a way and then reinforce it in ways that are meaningful to me that continues to move me along that path?
Wow, that's awesome. To the point you were making earlier about maybe these maladaptive or these patterns, I heard from somewhere, it might have been our friend Brock Painter, who he was talking about that our brain is more concerned about predictability and familiarity than even what is good for us. Something
Mm.
along those lines, right? So when you said
Brock
somehow
is
or
Brock is
another,
brilliant, so we
yeah,
can agree that he
yeah.
very much so nailed it.
And that was revelatory to me because it's if we're familiar with being in a state of dysregulation or stress or whatever, and we start to evolve or grow so where we're no longer feeling that, we can go into what maybe we would call self-sabotage now, because that's what actually feels safe and familiar and it's predictable, which means my brain thinks that's how I'm going to survive because that's kind of a core function, right?
Yeah.
And so that was that was an interesting insight in the
I
context of
mean,
this.
he nailed it for sure. And you can look at a lot of these sort of cliches and they become painful to a point, but they're always true. And that's why they're cliche. And one of them for me is the known is always safer than the unknown
Yeah.
for the majority of people. And so the problem with the known, though, is that the known isn't always kind. The known
Hmm.
isn't always loving. The known isn't always being really considerate of you. And I had
Yeah.
one client who every time that their behavior had patterns of laziness like they'd had in the past or anything like that, they would hear, I'm a lazy bum.
Mm.
And just like my father. And they had this whole pathology around their mother would say that to them and repeat that to them over, you're just like your dad. And yeah, the
Mm.
dad left. The dad wasn't around. And so what's interesting is that this pathology, he developed some safety of every time I repeat this, I actually feel a sense of safety and tribalism with my mother,
Mm.
even though
Wow.
it's not kind, even though it's not
Right.
really all that loving. Like my brain still says, but it's safer for me to agree with this person than it is for me to disagree and be
Mm.
alone and isolated. And
Yeah.
that is a scary thing. And I think for most people, this is why I feel like the Here Brotherhood and organizations like it are so important, is that we have to create communities where we are helping each other feel safe, belonging, acceptance, for the future version that we're creating for ourselves. And
Mm,
being able to
love
say,
that.
hey, lovingly, we're going to help and we're going to be right along with you to see you into this next chapter, this next version, this next part of you. And even for me, that was something that I was actively working on when I joined the Here Brotherhood. Was
Hmm.
I got so used to being in competition with other men because competition was safe. It was safer for me to say, I can climb the mountain faster than you. I can do it better than you. Any way that there's a dominance hierarchy from this place of insecurity, I'm going to go for it.
Mm,
There is not a lot of brotherly bonds that get built by doing that.
hmm.
It's born out of only being able to celebrate my peak experiences, not being able to celebrate my lowly experiences. So
Hmm.
I always hid the lowly ones, and I just didn't even know what being a healthy brother was. So when I joined Here Brotherhood initially, it was I'm relearning how to put on a brother sweater instead of constantly putting on my coach hat, constantly putting
Mm.
on my I know everything. I come look at all my cool trophies and celebrate me. And that was hard, but it was something I recognized of me isolating myself from other healthy, loving, good meaning men who are encouraging and pulling me forward to this beautiful next version of me. I need to learn how to be in brotherhood with them. And that's honestly a huge part of my journey. And what I have to thank the Here Brotherhood for was helping me learn what healthy, loving brother sweater actually looked and felt like.
Amazing. Well, Ian, this has been so insightful. Thank you for sharing. It's clear you've done a ton of research and and digging, and not just knowing the facts, but actually the experiential learning, which I think is so valuable. And this is coming from your lived experience, and that we often talk about sometimes like we find our purpose through our struggles, through our trials, through our setbacks, through our hardest moments. So often that is where our sense of purpose and service is born, because that we're able to help others in a way that is so relatable, authentic, empathetic, and powerful. So thank you for the work you do, brother. It is so good to reconnect with you and hear all this good stuff and have this conversation.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you, brother. Love you.
Love you too, brother.